Well, hello and welcome. It is the Nisha Jackson Show. We have a guest. I feel like I'm on the Brady Bunch all of a sudden. I look down, I see one guy, I look over this way, I see another one. Hi, Mom. How you doing? Before we get started, I want to remind you to please hit that subscribe button. Subscribe. Also share this video with your friends. This one is an important one. You don't want to miss it. Nisha, who is our guest I'm looking down at right now?
Yes, Michael Collins is with us today. He is a thought leader and a specialist on sugar addiction. One of my favorite topics to talk about. We talk about sugar a lot, don't we, Rusty?
Yes, a lot.
We do talk about it a lot. But Michael is the founder of sugaraddiction.com. That is a great domain name. And Quit Sugar Summit, as well as past chairman of the board and current board member of Addiction Institute. And he's actually been completely sugar-free for over 30 years. I don't even know how that's humanly possible. And has worked closely with others to help them regain their lives ravaged by this addiction product, a very addictive product. I can say that for sure. I come from a very long line of sugaraholics, Michael.
Me too.
True sugaraholics. I often heard that when you come from people in you have people in your family that are sugaraholics and alcoholics, that the addiction potential is magnified. So tell me how all of this happened with you. I'm very curious.
Well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. It's an honor, really. I got the podcast version. It probably brings up more questions than it answers. But, I thought I grew up as a regular kid. I think we all think that. But when I look back on it, we literally had unfettered access to the sugar bowl. My mother thought sugar was love, and I'll tell you the story as to why. We could put as much sugar on our Cheerios or cornflakes as we wanted. She never said anything. So as a result, we were scraping out a half inch or a quarter inch of sugar with the milk at the bottom.
Yes.
And the story is kind of sad. My grandmother died when she was just 8 years old. So they had to move in with her aunt, my grandfather's sister, and they owned the country store across the way. The family did. And so anytime she walked into the country store, they just said, give her the candy, give her whatever she wants, whatever she points to, just give it to her. And it was a wonderful gesture for someone who was, had lost their mom at 8 years old. But she really started to believe, and did, I think till she died almost, believe that sugar was love. We would bond with giant cookie batches every Saturday, and we were just covered up our entire childhood with sugar. And it really, there's a great YouTube video on with Eric Clapton on 60 Minutes talking about, and this is an integral part of the story. He's talking to Ed Bradley at 60 Minutes, and Ed Bradley says, they're sitting in his $7 million Antigua treatment center. And Ed Bradley says, Eric, so this addiction thing, it started with heroin, right? And Eric Clapton says, no, Ed, it started with sugar. I would eat bread and butter and sugar sandwiches, when I was 5 years old, just to change my state. Now, remember that, because it takes like a podcast length arc to understand that statement.
Right.
So fast forward, I get to running into beer and booze and pot and everything else at 14 and 15. And I knew that changed my state. I knew beer changed my state. I was kind of shy and I could talk to girls. We would drink behind the high school, called it liquid courage, whatever. Anyway, that's a different podcast. Fast forward to 28 and I got sober. So when I was getting sober, I realized that I went right back to sugar. Now, all this is in hindsight. I didn't see it at the time. And all the people that I'm working with or that I'm hanging out with in recovery, they all, same thing. They're getting diabetes diagnosis. They're gaining 50 pounds in the first year. And I was a thin, athletic guy. I had gained weight. And I was using it the same way, literally. I would drink 16-ounce Mountain Dews, 6 or 8 of them a day. I don't think I ate any real food, pasta, pizza, candy, ice cream. It was crazy. Mm-hmm. And so it took me a while. I read a book called Sugar Blues back in the day.
Yes, that was a good book.
Classic, right?
Yes, very much so.
so for your audience, the Sugar Blues was written by a guy named William Duffy. And Duffy ended up being married to Gloria Swanson, the famous movie star, right? Mm-hmm. They met at a party, and he's putting 2 lumps of sugar in his coffee. And she says, from behind, he doesn't, he recognized the voice, but a voice says, I wouldn't have that stuff in my house, let alone my body. And he was already a famous author at the time. And so they get married and they promote it. Anyway, I just took it to heart. I really love the history lesson. And I believe that to this day, that we can't figure out how we got as a society and as individuals in this mess until we figure out of this mess, till we figure out how we got in it. And his story of the English Empire growing on the backs of slavery and, in 200 years, just literally took over the world with the money they made on that, that commodity. And so, I mean, El Chapo, the drug dealer, wouldn't have anything on the British Empire. They had made so much money for so long. And so, anyway, I somehow at the time talked my wife at the time into having children with no sugar, no flour, no caffeine in the womb, and until it lasted till they were about 6 years old.
Right. Yeah. Rusty and I were trying to figure out how you did that. That's impressive because it's hard. It seems like sugar's in everything, right?
Oh, it was a nightmare.
And it's hard to keep your children away from sugar because, you can't control every place that they're getting it from. It's very difficult.
It was difficult. I mean, we fought their own grandparents and the schools and the Montessori schools and the parents' friends. They just thought we were depriving them of some kind of gift or something children need. Yeah. Right. Anyway, I honestly, and this is another subject, but we can talk about it, but kids don't go grocery shopping before they're 5 or 6. You're responsible for it. But anyway, the end of this thing is the kids always said I should write a book because obviously they grew up. After they did have a little sugar on one birthday party at 6, we regained our resolve. And for their whole childhood, they only had it once a month outside. They never had it inside the house. And so I did. And before that, I bought sugaraddiction.com about 12 years ago, the domain name. And I started putting out the best information on the planet. And some people kind of took it and ran with it. But for the most part, it wasn't until I was kind of semi-retired 4 or 5 years ago that I started coaching and doing online groups and forums and that kind of stuff. And that's when it just took off. And
what would you say from a sugar standpoint? I want people to make sure that they, can relate to what you're saying is that if people know, I mean, most people know if they have a sugar addiction or a propensity for sugar, right? Most people know that. Yeah. So for people who already know that, how is it that you've been sugar-free for 30 years? I mean, how did you, going from a lot of sugar growing up and then other drugs, like you talk about the gateway into other drugs, how do you do that? I mean, what would somebody even start thinking about doing if they know they have a sugar problem?
Yeah, it's a good question. And how I did it was not how I hope other people did. It took 2 years of on again, off again, on again, off again. The simple answer is what I call a protocol of step down. You quit the caffeine first because you're going to need the sugar to get off the caffeine. You do the sugar second and the flour third because you need the flour to get off the sugar. So it's a step down. But that's a lot easier. That's a lot easier said than done.
Why the caffeine? What's the tie between caffeine and sugar?
Caffeine will jack your blood sugar. And the core part of it is the wired together, fired together, and your nucleus accumbens, your brain reward chemicals. Chocolate and caffeine are tied together. Coffee and caffeine are tied. Coffee and sugar are tied together. So, like Pavlov's dogs, when you try to ingest. This happens a lot. People try and stick with black coffee. And try and quit sugar or whatever, this creates cravings. First, it starts to jack up your blood sugar. And then it's literally the body saying to itself, when I got this drug before, I used to get sugar. There was a combination of these two things. And so it keeps the cravings alive. We have to move completely away from the sweetness and the old memories, muscle memories, if you will, but more brain chemical reward memories is what it really is.
Right.
So until you've eliminated this craving for sweet, you literally readjust your taste buds. After a while, carrots taste sweet and peppers taste sweet.
Okay, I got to interrupt now. Okay, now you're getting me here. Okay, so here's my question, and that is, first of all, I mean, you're talking about these things like they're addictive. Wouldn't the government stop those things? Number one. And number two, don't we need a little energy, a little caffeine, a little sugar? It's good for us, right? Just a little bit. Come on.
No, I appreciate that because I get it all the time. It's not a problem. Look, one of my mentors says we are in the first 5 or 6 years of a tectonic shift in society. Okay. And you've heard the term the right side of history. Well, the right side of history means that when science declared that seatbelts would help save lives, many, many people resisted. When condoms in bathrooms were not accepted, condoms in general were not accepted. When doctors used to advertise it on television, when drinking and driving was just a kind of a pat on the head, don't get caught kind of thing. These scientific revelations and history prove to us that sugar and all its things the science behind it has exploded in the last 5 years. If you're plugged into where I sit and you could listen to just 5 minutes on my inbox, 5 minutes on my instant messenger, you would feel the pain out there of people who have struggled for 20 and 30 years trying to get off this stuff. And I started with late stage food addicts, people who were 200 and 300 pounds overweight, losing limbs, going blind, and they still couldn't quit the sugar when the doctor said, you will die this year if you don't quit. And I think that, the idea that finally for the first time, medical science has said, and even in the pyramid, the only thing that changed in the food pyramid that just came out last year, is that children should not have sugar sweetened beverages. And so the science is moving in this direction.
Right.
And that's why it's a tough societal shift. And I get it. It's understandable, but it's very real. And I know, like I said, it takes about a podcast setup for me to kind of get the whole arc of why I'm so passionate about this.
Right. And, I think one of the things this has happened to me too, because I can't have sugar in my house, because if it's in my house, I'm going to eat it. I'm going to find it and I'm going to eat it. Mm-hmm. And I just know that about myself. So I don't have it in my house unless it's an occasion that I whatever, it's a birthday party or whatever, but I just can't trust myself. But one of the things is that often keep people going back to it is that they get so sick when they go off of it. They feel like they have the flu. They feel depressed. And so one of the things that we like to do in our office when we take them off of it is replace some of the brain chemicals with amino acids that help bring up the serotonin, bring up the dopamine, because that's part of what they're getting with sugar is they're getting a hit from it, right?
100%.
So certainly
100%.
the depression is very much connected. And then teaching them how to eat right, how to eat more lean proteins, how to get good types of fat in your diet so you can nourish your system and nourish your brain and not be so depressed when you get off of the sugar. Because you're right, they do feel better after they almost feel worse initially, depending on the state of their addiction. So
you're 100% right. A good friend of Julia Ross. I mean, she's been on our summit many times, and her work.
She's awesome.
Her work with amino acids is, I think underutilized in a lot of ways. It's a very important part of the. I think some people's we were actually working on that protocol now. But yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that the description of the addiction or the withdrawals that you were describing are what people go through, and the reason that they turn back because they're busy. They got kids, they got a job. They don't have time to be depressed, to have headaches, to be hungry, to be lethargic, to be detoxing, have skin breakouts. They don't have time for all this. And one of the things that happens is in the 5th or 6th day when it's really nasty is they'll take a little bit of sugar and they'll realize all those symptoms go right away. And so almost unconsciously, they go right back to it. As a, it's been their go-to since they were children as an emotional management tool. This is the important part of our work, and the important message that I'd like to get out is that, think about it when you were a kid, like what Eric Clapton was saying is like, you were crying and hurt and upset and mean and mad or angry or whatever. And your mom didn't have time a couple times, and she would just give you a cookie and point you to the TV. And over time, we learn to literally use, I always talk about we use sugar to massage or to make us feel better. I mean, when was the last time you saw a movie where a woman got dumped by her boyfriend and didn't have an ice cream party? I mean, this is a real, true thing, right? And it's like, I always talk about the proverbial person who lost 100 or 200 pounds, and kept it off for a long time. They don't talk anything about the food. They don't talk anything about the exercise. What they talk about is their emotional rejiggering, their emotional maturity. It's a very common construct in the world of alcohol and drug addiction recovery that if you started using alcohol and drugs at 14 or 15, you stop growing emotionally. Your life's a mess. Your relationships are a mess. Your finances are a mess. Your career's a mess. And when you talk to people who have recovered from late stage or any kind of sugar addiction or flour addiction, that's exactly what they talk about. They've come to realize that they were using it as an emotional management tool. Their system of emotional management was completely run by a substance. And look, it's unconscious because in society, there's so much of it and it's almost free. You can always score a little bit. And I know this sounds, Rusty's going, I know this sounds awful druggy, but it's so true when you talk to the people who have been through it. And even the people who don't have gigantic 100 pounds overweight habits, the folks that I've got ultra marathoners and even an Olympic athlete who had the same issues going through it and had to recover in the same way. They had to stop using these products to manage their emotions. They had to find other outlets, yoga, walking, massage, any kind of self-care that might take some effort to get a dopamine hit, right?
Yes.
When your brain is looking for sugar and it's craving, it's not looking for a sweet taste. What it's looking for is a dopamine hit.
Right.
And this is the science that's exploded in the last 5 years.
Mm-hmm. So you talk about, the 7-day, the 12, the 14-day, the 21-day. You talk about, how long does it take to kind of get through these periods of we'll call them detox.
Yeah.
I've often told patients that just said, I don't even know where to start. I've always said, whether it's right or wrong, I've always said, if you could just make it 3 days, 72 hours without sugar, your need for it will already be substantially less. So, and it's so interesting. People will come in and they'll say, I think I have arthritis. My knuckles are swollen. My joints hurt. My body hurts. And I'll usually say that, like, we're going to test you, see what's going on, but try 72 hours with no sugar and flour and just see what happens with your arthritic hands. I'm telling you, most of the time they call back and say, I don't think I have arthritis.
Yep.
So the whole inflammatory thing is fascinating to me, and it shouldn't be too surprising for people today. But let's talk a little bit about the 7-day, 14-day, 21-day.
Can I ask one quick question before you get into that, because it's important, because you've both mentioned sugar and flour. What does flour have to do with anything?
Yes.
Good question. Yeah. No, I kind of sneak that in on the podcast, but I don't talk about it as I move into my programs because they don't want to know. People don't want to be giving up both at the same time. But flour turns to sugar in your stomach, basically, right? Almost immediately. It has such a huge surface area. It's digested so rapidly. It jacks your blood sugar, and it keeps the cravings alive. I call it powder addiction. Anything that's been reduced to a white powder, I think, is a problem. And we've been, genius is only pattern recognition. We've been blessed to be able to see thousands of detoxes over and over. And people that try and stay on the caffeine in the flour, thinking it's just the sugar, they usually, they just yo-yo up back and forth, back and forth. So yeah, flour is a big part of it. It really is. As far as the hands and the knees and the detox, everything is always hands and knees, hands and knees. People's hands clear up, their knees clear up. A lot of people, one person had already had one knee replacement and was getting scheduled for the other one and put it off because she didn't need it. And that happens in the hands and the carpal tunnel and the whole thing. But what I describe when I talk about 3-day, 7-day, 14-day, these are all detoxes that are out there from some famous people.
Right.
But most of them have bolted it on to some fitness or food plan. They've just kind of, it's all the rage, so they're adding it on. And what it does is 3 days is just not enough. I hate to bust your bubble, but 3 days is right in the middle of the detox. That is the worst time. That if they, there's great harm reduction. And I'll talk about harm reduction in a second, but
yes.
If you go 14 days, if you don't integrate what I've been describing about the emotional rejiggering, the emotional management system being redone in the first 30 days, 60 days, then you're doomed to repeat it. And what happens out there, and you've seen the studies, this is like scientific lore. Literally, there's hundreds of peer-reviewed studies that say and there's actually a CDC study on The Biggest Loser, that if people lose substantial amounts of weight, they always gain it back in the first year. And obviously, any diet book worth the paper it's printed on says, quit the white stuff, flour and sugar. So people white knuckle and they exercise and they get off the white stuff for 14 days, 30 days, whatever. But if they don't integrate into this recovery plan a substitute for the emotional management, then they end up repeating it. And this is what the studies are out there. 95% of people not only gain all the weight back, but then they add some. And even people with bariatric surgery figure out ways to ingest sugar, liquid sugar, and it ruins their operation and stuff. This is also very common knowledge and very scientifically proven. So if they don't do the emotional management learning, if they don't get it in the early days and begin a substitute, then they're bound to repeat it.
Yeah, I totally agree. And starting from a young child, I agree, even though you and I, when we grew up, all three of us having, unsweetened cereal, but then putting teaspoons of sugar on it. If you look at how many teaspoons are in some of the sugars today, it's more than what we were using.
I know.
Even though we still had a lot of that sugar at the bottom of the bowl, which, by the way, mixed with milk was pretty darn good.
Tasty, right? I love that stuff.
Pretty good. I couldn't wait to get to the bottom.
Right. And think about it. It's like you use up your entire daily allotment of dopamine in like 20 minutes. And then you're like chasing that high again for the rest of the day. And it's this science in the last 5 years that has kind of fleshed out our ability to succeed so well with so many people, is that now we get it. We understand that we are literally, now look, we do a little bit of heroin, we do a little bit of alcohol, we do a little bit of cocaine, but we are pounding 21 teaspoons a day through this system, probably since we were children. And if you have any habit at all, a Coke is 12 teaspoons of sugar. You're probably doing 30 or 40 this is before flour, teaspoons of sugar through your body. You are never not manually manipulating your dopamine. No wonder when you quit for 12 days, you're depressed a little bit, because now what it's called scientifically is down-regulated. Your dopamine receptors are down-regulated, thinned out. You have less of them, right? And so when you finally stop, your body goes, and you're not going to be able to you're not even going to get what we do as adults when you're using sugar, flour, or caffeine. You're not trying to get any buzz. All you're trying to do is get back to even. You just don't want to go into withdrawals. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Is fruit out too?
Oh, you're going to hate me. You're going to hate me. This is where I
hate you already, so it doesn't matter how much fruit you go.
But it's okay. I'm very used to it. So the fruit thing is a big one, especially in the early days, as I described the the readjustment to I call it the original operating software, the original operating software of the body. So look at fruit, okay? 300 years ago, fruit was these little crab apples or those nasty little berries you see. And once a year, if you want to risk getting stung by it, be a little bit of honey. That's how much fructose we used to eat, okay? Now, important lesson, important part of the process. The table sugar molecule is half fructose and half glucose, right, for your listeners. And people have always worried and thought about or concentrated upon the glucose part of it, where it causes diabetes, causes heart disease, causes everything you can think of under the sun, metabolic stuff, metabolic illness, right? What has exploded in the last 5 years is the understanding of fructose, okay? So fructose, forget about powdered fructose. That's even like the difference between coca leaves and cocaine. I mean, but look, the fructose is the offending molecule. This is what's acting on the nucleus accumbens. This is what only can be processed in the liver, okay? There's no other way that the fructose can be processed. It has to go through the liver. So we have an epidemic of 5-year-old with fatty liver disease. This is an alcoholic's disease that 5-year-olds are now getting because of the massive amounts of fructose. Right. So back to the fruit a second. Look at navel oranges, look at seedless grapes. These things are hybridized fructose bombs. They couldn't replicate in nature because they have no seeds, right? And so when you begin the process of detoxing from sugar, you're going to very easily keep the nucleus accumbens going by adding this fructose, this continuous fructose hit. And if you were to drink a dried fruit, forget about it. Fruit juice, forget about it. A glass of organic orange juice will hit the liver with the same pounding of fructose that a Coca-Cola will. And so it's no different. And the fruit will just keep you the cravings alive. The fructose hit to the brain will just keep the cravings alive.
Right.
So yeah, it's a big one. I get a lot of pushback on it, and you're not alone there, Rusty.
Yeah. So we just have a few minutes left, Michael. I want to make sure that our guests hear about the summit and some of the other things. I mean, is this a place where they could go to your website and get more information about? Because I think the emotional part's really important to talk about. I'm glad that you weaved that in several times during the show.
Yeah.
Dealing with that emotional component and what is the trigger emotionally that you're satisfying when you're eating the sugar, as opposed to just trying to go hardcore, no sugar. Like maybe that should be evaluated, right? So, so how can we tell our guests about what they could do if they want to understand that more?
Yeah, just sugaraddiction.com if you want. You can there's a big yellow book there. You just click on the book and you can download it for free. It tells the story of all the stuff that we're talking about a little bit more in depth. Mm-hmm. And I'm happy that you mentioned the Quit Sugar Summit. We've been doing it for 5-6 years now. We're going to have our 7th event in September. So if you just go there and leave your email, you'll get notified. But you can see all of the experts. We actually had Judy Collins, the famous singer, on, and Dr. Lustig and Gary Taubes and Dr. Fettke and Dr. Noakes. I mean, all of the biggest sugar educators in the world are there. And we have them, most of them every year because people love them so much, but we have new people every year as well. Mm-hmm. And this is where the science has been, trumping the cultural history, right? The 300 years of evolution of sugar into our diet so deeply. And it's a big battleship to turn around, and the summit does a lot to help people, motivate them to understand. Most people, when they come for weight loss, but they also come because they don't want to repeat what maybe happened to their parents, which is dementia, what they're calling Alzheimer's 3, and diabetes and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, thank you. It's I always tell folks, if they get to sugaraddiction.com, we got a quiz there, and you watch something like this, you don't really need to take the quiz. Just grab the book. Just grab the book.
Well, I appreciate your information to everybody, because this is a worldwide epidemic for sure. Transcends every segment of the population, and it's a hot topic. And I love educating people about this because it really does affect everybody.
Yeah.
And I think it's led to our massive use of alcohol now, and very accepted socially use of just now I call it the liquid sugar too.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, and the coffee drinks for sure. So it was really nice having you. What if you, in leaving, what's just one tip or one piece of hope you could give to our audience about trying to recover from being a sugarholic?
Yeah, what we found, it's interesting that in just kind of surveys and just knowing everybody, is that the folks that resonate with like a podcast like this, or if they've done their research, a lot of them are pioneers. They're the first in their family to go to college. I mean, you go back to their history, they're the leader of the sewing circle. They've done well in their career in academics and athletics. They're not afraid to go against the grain and to, join a new tribe, a tribe who believes a little different, maybe than their family of origin. And so if this is something that's you find yourself as relating to, you're kind of a pioneer and not afraid to step out and do something good for yourself, then those are the kind of folks that I think we're the early adopters, as they say in tech. We're the folks that, like, 99.9% of the people are going to have the questions just like Rusty, and they're going to be like, "Hey, that's crazy talk." Who is it? Who is this guy?
Well, as the leader of the Sewing Club, I really appreciate you being here. He's Mike Collins. The website again is sugaraddiction.com. Sugaraddiction.com. Nisha Jackson's website's out there too. NishaJackson.com as well. And Mike's book is The Last Resort Sugar Detox Guide, right?
Yes, sir.
And you can get it for free. Download it for free at sugaraddiction.com.
You got it.
All right. Until next time, please hit that subscribe button, share it. This is an important show. Make sure you share this with all your friends and your sugar addict friends too. Until next time, she's Nisha Jackson, and this is the Nisha Jackson Show.